The Viking sleep system. Body, food, work, mind, and meaning. Sleep in the Viking world was never treated as a separate activity. It was not something scheduled, measured, or optimized. It was not something that needed improvement or correction. Sleep simply happened because everything else in life quietly prepared the body and mind for it. This is perhaps the most important difference between Viking sleep and modern sleep. Today, sleep is isolated. It is treated as a problem to be solved at the end of the day, after light, stress, noise, and stimulation have already done their damage. In the Viking Age, sleep was not an end point. It was the natural result of how the day had been lived. The Norse people did not possess scientific language for neurotransmitters, circadian rhythms, or sleep architecture. Yet their lives followed patterns that modern science now recognizes as deeply supportive of restorative rest. Their environment, food, physical labor, social structure, and beliefs all worked together, forming a single system. When night arrived, sleep did not need to be forced. It emerged. One of the quiet foundations of this system was calm. Not the artificial calm of sedation, but a gradual lowering of tension that began long before anyone lay down. Viking healers understood this intuitively. They did not attempt to overpower sleeplessness. Instead, they softened the conditions that prevented sleep from arriving on its own. Herbs played a role here, but never as the central solution. Valerian, hops, linden blossom, chamomile, and aromatic plants were known and used, yet always gently. These plants reduced restlessness, quieted anxiety, and eased the transition into night. They did not erase awareness. They did not suppress dreams. They simply removed sharp edges from the mind. What made these remedies effective was not their strength, but their context. They were used in dark homes, after physically demanding days, among familiar people, with no artificial light or urgency. In such an environment, even mild calming influences could be powerful. Modern sleep medication often fails, not because it is weak, but because it is asked to fight an entire lifestyle. Viking remedies never fought. They flowed with everything else. Food reinforced this calm rather than disrupting it. The Viking diet, shaped by climate and survival, avoided one of the most common modern sleep problems, late digestion. Meals were eaten early, usually in the afternoon or early evening. By the time darkness deepened, the body was no longer busy processing heavy food. Blood sugar had stabilized. Insulin had done its work. The body was free to shift into repair mode. Their food was simple and unprocessed. Fish provided protein and omega-3 fats that supported brain function and sleep depth. Whole grains like barley and oats released energy slowly, preventing nighttime blood sugar crashes that can wake the body suddenly. Fermented foods supported gut health, which modern research now links directly to neurotransmitter balance and sleep regulation. Sugar was rare, alcohol was mild, and consumed earlier in the day. Nothing in this diet demanded attention at night. The stomach rested, and the brain followed. Physical work completed the preparation. Viking life required movement on a scale that is difficult to imagine today. Rowing, farming, carrying, building, chopping, grinding, walking. These were not exercises added to the day. They were the day itself. The body accumulated fatigue honestly through effort that involved muscle, breath, and coordination. This type of fatigue is fundamentally different from modern exhaustion. Mental overload without physical release leaves the nervous system tense. Viking fatigue did the opposite. It drained excess energy from the body and quieted the mind. When night came, there was no surplus restlessness left to burn. The timing of this labor mattered. Physical exertion peaked during daylight and eased naturally toward evening. The body cooled as the sun dropped. Hormones followed their natural rhythm. Modern science confirms that this pattern, hard work earlier, calm later, is ideal for deep sleep. Vikings followed it not by design, but by necessity. Recovery was not ignored. Bathing, especially in warm water, was part of Viking life. Heat relaxed muscles, and the subsequent cooling of the body promoted sleep onset. This effect is now well documented in sleep research, yet Vikings experienced it without explanation or measurement. Social structure reinforced everything. Sleep did not happen in isolation. It occurred in shared spaces among family and community. This provided safety, both physical and psychological. When danger is shared, vigilance relaxes. When responsibility is distributed, anxiety decreases. The nervous system recognizes this and allows deeper sleep. Modern humans often sleep alone, in silence, with the burden of safety carried entirely by one mind. The Viking sleeper rarely carried that burden alone. Belief completed the system. The Norse people's understanding of the world accepted uncertainty. Fate existed. Outcomes were not entirely under personal control. This belief did not produce passivity, it produced balance. Action mattered, but worry did not dominate the night. Dreams were not feared. They were not dismissed as meaningless noise. They were part of the night's landscape. This acceptance reduced fear of sleep itself. Modern sleep anxiety often begins with the belief that waking, dreaming, or losing control is dangerous. Viking belief removed this fear. The night was not something to conquer, it was something to enter. What emerges from all of this is not a list of sleep tips, but a picture of coherence. Every element of Viking life pointed in the same direction. Darkness arrived, activity slowed, food was finished, bodies were tired, minds were calm, and community provided safety. Sleep followed naturally. Modern sleep struggles are often treated as individual failures or medical defects. The Viking example suggests something else entirely. When sleep breaks, it may not be the sleeper who is broken, but the system surrounding them. The Norse people did not chase sleep. They did not optimize it, track it, or fear it. They lived in a way that made good sleep unavoidable. That may be the most difficult lesson of all for the modern world. Not that we lack techniques, but that we have separated sleep from life itself. The Vikings remind us that rest is not achieved through control, but through alignment.
This alignment was not accidental, and it was not fragile. It did not collapse because of one bad night or one restless hour. Viking sleep was resilient because it did not depend on perfection. If someone woke in the night, it was normal. If sleep came in two parts, it was expected. If dreams were vivid or strange, they were accepted. Nothing about the night demanded correction. This resilience is something modern sleep culture has almost entirely lost. Today, a single poor night can spiral into anxiety. One awakening becomes a diagnosis. One restless hour becomes a fear that tomorrow will be ruined. The Viking sleeper did not carry this pressure. Sleep was not judged, it was experienced. The environment itself reinforced this attitude. Darkness was complete, silence was deep. There were no clocks glowing in the corner, no screens whispering stimulation, no constant reminders of time passing. Without these cues, the mind had no reason to monitor itself. Awareness softened naturally. Thought slowed. Sleep arrived when it was ready. Even wakefulness at night felt different. In a Viking longhouse, waking did not mean isolation. Someone else might already be awake, quietly tending the fire or shifting position. A sound, a breath, a familiar presence reminded the mind that nothing was wrong. The night was still doing what it always did. This shared rhythm removed one of the greatest enemies of sleep, loneliness. Modern neuroscience shows that isolation heightens vigilance. The brain becomes responsible for everything. In the Viking world, responsibility was shared, and the brain responded by letting go. The same principle applied during the day. Work was rarely solitary. Rowing required coordination. Farming required cooperation. Building required many hands. This constant social synchronization regulated emotion and stress long before nightfall. By the time sleep arrived, the nervous system was already balanced. Modern humans often attempt to recover at night from days spent alone, mentally overloaded, and physically still. The Vikings did not need to recover from isolation. Their days had already distributed the emotional load. Even fear was handled differently. The Viking world was dangerous. Violence, illness, and death were not abstract possibilities. They were part of life. Yet fear did not dominate the night. This was not because danger was ignored, but because it was acknowledged openly. Weapons were kept nearby. Dogs listened. People trusted one another to wake if something moved in the dark. This practical readiness reduced anxiety. Modern fear often grows from uncertainty and helplessness. Viking readiness created calm. Belief also played a quiet role here. The Norse concept of fate did not remove responsibility, but it removed obsession. You acted with honor, you prepared as best you could, and then you released what could not be controlled. This mental posture is strikingly similar to what modern psychology now teaches as acceptance-based stress regulation. At night, this acceptance mattered. Worry did not need to be solved before sleep. It could be set down. Dreams, too, were given space. They were not interruptions. They were messages, reflections, or simply part of the night's movement. Because dreams were expected, they were not fought. Because they were discussed, they lost their power to frighten. Fear thrives in silence. Viking culture did not leave dreams alone in silence. Children absorbed all of this from the beginning. They learned that night was not dangerous, that waking was not failure, that darkness was normal. Their nervous systems developed without constant artificial stimulation. Their sleep patterns formed under natural conditions. Many modern sleep problems begin in childhood. Viking children were protected from them without anyone trying to protect them deliberately. As centuries passed, this entire system began to erode. Artificial light extended evenings. Work schedules detached from daylight. Architecture fragmented households into isolated rooms. Food became heavier and later. Physical labor diminished, while mental labor intensified. Sleep was pushed into narrower windows and expected to perform on command. By the time sleep became a problem, the conditions that once supported it were already gone. What the Viking example ultimately shows is not that they possessed secret knowledge, but that they had not yet broken the connection between life and rest. Sleep was not a separate activity. It was the body's response to a day lived in rhythm. This is why their sleep appears so strong in retrospect. It was not protected by technology, medication, or optimization. It was protected by coherence. When every part of life points in the same direction, sleep does not resist. It follows. The coherence of Viking sleep did not depend on comfort or ease. In fact, much of Viking life was uncomfortable by modern standards. Cold was common. Hunger was sometimes present. Death was visible. Yet sleep survived all of this because it was not fragile. It did not require perfect conditions. It required only that life itself did not constantly contradict the body's expectations. One of the most important but least discussed aspects of Viking sleep was predictability without rigidity. Days followed a recognizable rhythm, but they were not locked to exact hours. There was no alarm forcing the body awake before it was ready, nor artificial light pushing it beyond fatigue.
The mind learned over time that night would arrive, rest would come, and morning would follow. This expectation created trust between the body and the environment. Modern sleep often fails because this trust has been broken. The body no longer believes the night will protect it. It expects interruption, noise, obligation, light, and so it stays partially awake even while asleep. In the Viking world, the night did what it promised. Weather reinforced this trust. Wind, snow, rain, and cold followed seasonal patterns, harsh, yes, but consistent. The human nervous system adapts better to predictable hardship than to unpredictable comfort. A storm that behaves like storms always have is less stressful than a quiet night that might be interrupted at any moment. This is why the soundscape of Viking sleep mattered so much. Fire crackled, wind pressed against walls, wood settled. These sounds were not threats, they were confirmations. The brain recognized them as familiar, non-random, safe. Modern noise is often random, sharp, and unpredictable. Sirens, engines, notifications, these sounds demand attention. Viking night sounds did not. The architecture itself amplified this effect. Thick walls muffled sudden external noise. Interiors were acoustically soft. Straw, wool, and wood absorbed sound rather than reflecting it. Even movement within the longhouse was quieted by natural materials. This reduced micro-awakenings, allowing sleep to deepen. Temperature stability also played a role. Viking sleep environments were cool but not fluctuating. The body sleeps best when core temperature can drop gradually and remain stable. Modern heating systems often create cycles of overheating and cooling that disturb sleep. Viking homes cooled naturally and stayed cool. The body adapted. Clothing during sleep mattered as well. Vikings slept in loose garments or under furs and blankets that allowed movement and airflow. Tight, restrictive clothing was impractical and rare. Modern sleepwear often prioritizes fashion over physiology. The Viking sleeper prioritized function without thinking about it. Another rarely mentioned factor is absence of anticipation. Modern humans often go to bed thinking about the next day, deadlines, alarms, responsibilities. This forward-facing anxiety activates stress hormones that directly oppose sleep. Vikings lived in a world where tomorrow existed, but it did not dominate the night. Tasks were handled when light returned. Night was not for planning, it was for resting. This separation of time and purpose protected the mind. Modern technology has erased these boundaries. Night is now another extension of day. The Viking night remained its own domain. Social expectations reinforced this. There was no cultural pressure to be productive at night. Staying awake unnecessarily was not admired. Worrying endlessly was seen as foolish, not responsible. These values mattered. Culture shapes what the mind believes is normal. The Viking concept of strength included rest. A warrior who did not sleep was not heroic, he was impaired. This understanding prevented the glorification of exhaustion that defines much of modern society. Even storytelling served sleep rather than disrupting it. Stories were oral, slow, repetitive, familiar. They did not introduce shocking novelty or rapid information. They guided the mind gently toward rest. Modern entertainment does the opposite, flooding the brain with stimulation at the exact moment it needs to slow down. Firelight, again, deserves emphasis. Its movement is slow and organic. The brain evolved watching fire. It induces calm, lowers heart rate, and reduces cortical arousal. Vikings spent evenings staring into fire without realizing they were regulating their nervous systems. Modern lighting rarely offers this benefit. The transition from wakefulness to sleep was gradual. There was no abrupt bedtime. There was a drift. This drift is crucial. Sudden transitions confuse the brain. Gradual transitions prepare it. Vikings drifted into night. Dreaming fit naturally into this process. Because dreams were not feared, the mind did not resist entering REM sleep. Resistance is costly. It fragments sleep. Acceptance smooths the transition between sleep stages.
Even nightmares were contextualized. They were not signs of mental weakness. They were messages, warnings, or reflections of life's dangers. This framing reduced secondary fear, the fear of the dream itself, which is often what causes long-term sleep disturbance. Modern people often fear their own minds at night. Vikings did not. Another subtle factor was physical orientation. Sleeping platforms were aligned along walls, often with heads towards the interior and feet towards the outer wall. This created a sense of enclosure and protection. Humans sleep better when they feel sheltered. Modern open bedrooms with large windows can trigger unconscious vulnerability responses. The presence of animals also mattered. Dogs, livestock nearby, even horses in adjacent structures provided auditory reassurance. Animals react before humans do. Their calm signaled safety. Modern humans sleep separated from the animal world and must interpret silence alone. Time perception at night was different. Without clocks, minutes didn't matter. There was no pressure to fall asleep quickly. Sleep latency was not measured. This removed one of the most damaging modern sleep anxieties. If sleep came slowly, it was fine. If wakefulness returned, it was fine. The night was long. There was room. This spaciousness of time is something modern humans rarely experience. Nights are now compressed between obligations. Sleep must perform efficiently. The Viking night had no such demand. As artificial light, clocks, and rigid schedules spread through Europe, this spaciousness disappeared. Sleep became narrow, fragile, and monitored. Anxiety replaced acceptance. What the Viking example ultimately reveals is that sleep thrives not in control, but in permission. Permission to rest, permission to wake, permission to drift, permission to surrender attention. The Vikings lived in a world that gave this permission automatically. Modern humans now must consciously reclaim it, not by copying Viking life literally, but by understanding the principles that made their sleep strong. Rhythm instead of rigidity, darkness instead of illumination, community instead of isolation, effort instead of stimulation, acceptance instead of anxiety. Sleep is not broken. The relationship between life and rest is. And the Viking world, quiet and dark 1,000 years ago, still has something to say about how that relationship once worked.
Over time, what truly separated Viking sleep from modern sleep was not toughness, discipline, or endurance. It was alignment. Their bodies, environments, beliefs, and daily actions all pointed in the same direction. Nothing pulled against sleep. Nothing argued with it. Modern humans live inside contradiction. We demand rest while designing lives that signal danger, urgency, and stimulation until the final moment of the day. We lie down while our nervous system is still convinced it must stay alert. The Vikings did not ask their bodies to perform miracles. They allowed biology to do what it already knew how to do. This is why their sleep does not feel exotic or mystical when examined closely. It feels familiar, almost uncomfortably so, as if something deeply human has been forgotten rather than lost. When a Viking closed their eyes, they were not escaping the world. They were still inside it. The fire was there. The walls were there. The breath of others was there. The night was not an empty void, but a continuation of life in a quieter form. Sleep was not separation, it was transition. Modern sleep often feels like disappearance. We shut doors, isolate rooms, silence everything, and then wonder why the mind resists. The Viking sleeper never disappeared, they simply softened. This softening mattered. Muscles relaxed because they had worked. Thoughts slowed because they had already been expressed in conversation and story. Emotions settled because they were shared, not suppressed. Even grief and fear had space during the day. Night did not have to carry them. In this sense, Viking sleep was not better because nights were longer or beds were simpler.
It was better because nothing unfinished followed them into darkness. Modern life leaves too much unresolved. Sleep becomes the battlefield where it all returns. The Vikings accepted limits. Darkness ended work. Winter ended certain ambitions. Fatigue ended activity. These endings protected sleep. Today, limits are seen as obstacles. Light removes darkness. Technology removes night. Willpower tries to remove fatigue. Sleep is squeezed into what remains. What disappears with these limits is permission. Permission to stop. Permission to be still. Permission to not improve, optimize, or achieve anything at night. The Viking night required nothing from you, and because it required nothing, it gave rest. As societies changed, this relationship slowly reversed. Sleep became something to manage, then something to fix, then something to fear. The quieter the night became externally, the louder it grew internally. Silence, once comforting, became threatening. Darkness, once natural, became unfamiliar. Today, many people sleep surrounded by light, noise, data, and monitoring devices, yet feel less safe than a Viking did in a wooden hall 1,000 years ago. That contrast is the real lesson. Safety is not built by control, it is built by coherence. The Vikings lived in coherence. Their sleep emerged from it effortlessly. This does not mean the Viking world was ideal or gentle. It was harsh, but it was honest. The body knew what to expect, and when the body knows what to expect, it can rest. In the end, the question is not whether Vikings slept better than we do. The evidence suggests they often did. The deeper question is why. They did not chase sleep. They lived in a way that made chasing unnecessary. And that may be the most difficult lesson of all for the modern world. Not that we need darker rooms, earlier dinners, or more physical labor, though all of these help, but that sleep cannot survive in a life that never truly slows, never truly ends the day, and never truly feels safe enough to let go. The Viking night was dark, quiet, shared, and finite. It ended. Morning came, and sleep, having been allowed to exist without pressure, did its work. That is where this story rests, not in nostalgia, not in myth, but in the reminder that deep, restorative sleep is not a luxury of the past. It is a consequence of living in rhythm. And rhythm, unlike technology, has never stopped being human.
Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel so you'll be the first to know when new videos drop.